So in case you didn't see, Veritas has made a few responses to that video I made. No videos, just text comments, and the text comments come off, at least to my eyes anyway, as emotionally charged, very reactionary, and in one of them, he was even postulating as to whether or not I was tipsy. He said I was possibly tipsy while I recorded that video last night. What? To suggest that I'm the kind of guy that comes onto YouTube, makes short, very frank critiques of a person's worldview while drunk? Is that really how I present myself, Noah? That's very little of you, kiddo. I know you're older than me, but this is stupid. Possibly tipsy. You know, for all the stock you put in philosophy, I give you a number of arguments that if what you say is right, you could have shot them all down. But you resorted to saying that you resent being told what to do. And interestingly enough, you have told me what to do about my videos. You told me that I need to flush out my theological views for everyone to see. You remember that? And then you come out with this stuff that, like, oh yeah, he's totally ignorant and probably tipsy. Possibly tipsy. Just writing me off like that. Like I'm the alcoholic here. Yikes. It's like, that's very little of you. Very little of you. Noah did, however, give me a list of videos to watch. And they are, so far, I've only watched a little bit of it. And I just wanted to make some comments. Get that off my chest. The drunk philosopher slam off my chest. And offer my disappointment to what I've seen so far in these videos. You know, Christian apologetics. I still say there is a disconnect between talking about God in a purely philosophic light and then suddenly talking about the epistemic Christianity, or the epistemic this and that, whatever else. And indeed, he begins his series on the resurrection talking about the historicity, a word I heard Professor Anton use, so it must be real. The historicity of the resurrection. And he began the series talking about the existential versus the historic way of explaining the basis for this whole thing. And though his series focuses, or seems to so far focus on the historic account, he does make mention that Christianity is properly basic. Term that means, I wrote it down, a term that means basically it's just there to begin with. How did it go? Oh, Christianity lies at the base of cognitive structure and makes no inferences to anything outside that. And that it's just part of our cognitive structure. It's part of our very essence, being a Christian. However, this is all premised then on the idea that so long as you have a personal inward witnessing of the Holy Spirit. After that point, then Christianity becomes properly basic, which refutes, of course, the notion of anything being properly basic if it is contingent upon anything. That's the point. That's the point of calling something properly basic. You can't say it's properly basic only if this other non-properly basic thing happens before it. But that aside, that only made up a few seconds of the video, and there are 8 videos here, and I've only gotten through the first 3. And it's a lot of talk of history, and what I'm more interested in is philosophy. I want you, Noah, to talk philosophy. I want you to, just like you were talking about the existential validity for the resurrection. And you see, if you would have gone on with that argument, we would have immediate philosophic problems, what I just said. But you don't. You go on about historicity. My new favorite word, I guess. And the problem with it is that you approach it from an inappropriate stance as to how historical documents are judged. You make the claim that a lot of, and I don't want to talk too much about this. I'll give you a full critique after I watch the whole videos. But so far, here's what I got: is that it doesn't matter how many authors actually contribute to the Bible. All of them came after Christ. Okay. And the notion of the resurrection, at least as the Old Testament is concerned, begins with Paul. And Paul didn't write, it was like after. He was not a disciple, right? He wasn't walking around with Christ. He wrote about it at a later time. And I even have read that some people believed it was a vision that he had, similar to how Joseph Smith had a vision about Christ appearing to him and telling him all these kinds of things, and telling him all these things that have happened, and thus becoming the foundation for Mormonism. That similarly, Paul had such a vision of the risen Christ. That aside, then, what you're trying to say is that because all of these authors that now collectively make up the Bible talk about Christ, then we have reason to believe that the Christ resurrection story is valid. The problem, though, is when we're dealing with historical documents, validity is not gained through sheer number. It's in dates. And so if you can find something that it was written in the time, in the area of Christ while he lived and walked the earth, that's going to be much better. If it starts with Paul, and Paul didn't walk with Christ, and everything else in the Bible is after Paul, there is good reason to believe that their account is just based on the Paul text, the Pauline texts. Okay? It doesn't give us any reason to believe that they are drawing on anything new. It could be just a repeat of what Paul came up with from the start. So what you have to ask yourself is whether or not Paul made something that was valid. You mentioned Josephus and Tacitus. Tacitus was writing about that a century after Christ was crucified. So that doesn't count. And Josephus was believed to have been, his works have been believed to have been edited by Eusebius, a Catholic bishop who was a historian, but could have possibly edited all of that to justify the existence of Jesus Christ. There's also a problem that I know, we're talking history, in the word Barabbas, that Barabbas is not a name and that it's just not translated. And what it actually means is Bar means the son of, and Abbas meaning the father. And what it's believed, anyway, or a contrary point of view, is that with the whole Pontius Pilate story, the people chose Jesus, the Son of God, to live. Barabbas, the Son of God. Let the Son of God live and kill this crazy person that thinks he's the king of all Jews. I mean, there are people in mental institutions today that think they're the king of the world, or the emperor, or the secret this, or whatever else. That would make plenty sense. But it's the one word in the New Testament that is not translated, and it's not a name. That, again, just from what I've read, I know you have read much more about this stuff than I have, but some of the premises here are faulty. What you have to find for us is not just a bunch of stuff that talk about Jesus Christ. You have to find stuff that is period specific and are not just independent of each other, but all around that same time, that had to, something that predates Paul, and specifically something that was about the time of the Josephus text. That is the strongest evidence Christians have as a secondary source. You said in your videos that there are bunches of secondary sources. They're not. This one is the strongest potential, but because it might have been altered by a Catholic bishop, there's a lot of problem in this. If such a remarkable person as Jesus Christ of the Bible existed, we could expect far more than just one outside source. That's a historic discussion. I want to have a philosophic discussion. I hope you do too. Have a nice weekend.